My name is Itachi Uchiha, and today I'm gonna be reading a little story by 1000 Vultures called Footsteps. Alright, let's begin. In a quiet room. In a quiet room, if you press your ear against the pillow, you can hear your heartbeat. As a kid, the muffled rhythmic beats sounded like soft footsteps on a carpeted floor. And so as a kid, almost every night, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I would hear these footsteps and I would be rippled back to consciousness, terrified. For my entire childhood, I lived with my mother in a fairly nice neighborhood that was in my transitional phase. People of the lower economic means were gradually moving in, and my mother and I were two of those people. We lived in that kind of house you would see being transported in two pieces on the interstate. But my mom took great care of it. There were a lot of woods surrounding the neighborhood and I would play in and explore during the day. But at night, as things often do to a kid, they took a more sinister feeling. This coupled in with the fact that, due to the nature of our house, there was a fairly large crawl space underneath that filled my mind with imaginary monsters and inescapable scenarios which would consume my thoughts when I was awoken by the footsteps. I told my mom about the footsteps, and she said that I was just imagining things. I persisted enough, and she blasted my ears with water from a turkey blaster once just to placate me, since I thought that would help. Of course it didn't. Despite all the creepiness and the footsteps, the only weird thing that ever happened was that every now and then I would wake up to the bottom bunk despite having gone to sleep on the top. But this wasn't really weird, since I'd sometimes get up to piss or get something to drink, or could remember just going back to sleep on the bottom bunk. I'm the only child, so it doesn't matter. This only would happen once or twice a week, but waking up on the bottom bunk wasn't too terrifying. But one night, I didn't wake up on the bottom bunk. I heard footsteps, but they were too far gone to be awoken by them. And when I was awoken by them, it wasn't from the sound of footsteps or a nightmare, but because I was cold. Really cold. When I opened my eyes, I saw stars. I was in the woods. I sat up immediately and tried to figure out what was going on. I thought I was dreaming, but that did not seem right. Though neither did me being in the woods. There was a deflated pool float right in front of me. One of those shaped like a shark. This only added to the surreal feeling, but after a while, it seemed like I just wasn't going to wake up because I wasn't asleep. I stood up and to orient myself, but I didn't recognize those woods. I played in the woods by my house all the time, so I knew them really well. But if they weren't the same woods, then how could I get out? I took a step and felt the shooting pain in my foot, which knocked me back to where I was laying. I had stepped on a thorn. By the light of the moon, I could have seen that they were everywhere. I looked at my other foot, but it was fine. And as a matter of fact, so was the rest of me. I didn't have another scratch on me, and I wasn't even that dirty. I cried for a little and stood back up. I didn't know which way to go, so I just picked a direction. I resisted the urge to call out since I wasn't sure if I wanted to be found out by whatever might be out there. I walked for what seemed like hours. I tried to walk in a straight line and tried to course correct when I had to take detours. But I was a kid, and I was afraid. There weren't any howls or screams, and only once did I hear any noise that scared me. It sounded like a crying baby. I think now that it was just a cat, but I panicked. I ran, veering in different directions to avoid big thick bushes and collapsed trees. And I was paying close attention to what or where I stepped, because at that point my feet were in pretty bad shape. I paid too much attention to where I was stepping, and not enough to where those steps were leading. Because not long after hearing that cry, I saw something that filled me with a kind of despair I haven't experienced since. It was a pool float. I was only 10 feet from where I had woken up. This wasn't magic or some supernatural space bending. I was lost. Up until that moment, I thought more about how I would get out of the woods more than how I got in. But being back at the beginning made my mind swim. I wasn't even sure that those were in my woods. I had only hoped that they were. Had I run in a huge circle from that spot? Or did I just get turned around and start making my way back? How was I going to get out? At that time, I just thought the North Star was the brightest star, and so I looked and found the brightest one and followed it. Eventually, things started looking more familiar, and then I saw the ditch. A dirt ditch my friends and I would have dirt-colored wars in. I knew I had made it out. By that point I was walking really slowly because my feet would hurt so much. But I was so happy I was making it close to home that I broke into a light jog. When I actually saw the roof of my house over the neighboring lower said house, I let out a light sob and ran faster. I just wanted to go home. I already decided that I wouldn't say anything because I had no idea what I could possibly say. I would get back into the house and somehow clean up and get in bed. My heart sunk as I rounded the corner in my house and came fully into view. Every light in the house was on. I knew my mom was up, and I knew I would have to explain, or try to explain, where I've been. And I couldn't even figure out where to start. My run became a jog, which became a walk. I saw her silhouette through the blinds. And although I was worried about how to explain things, that didn't matter to me at that point. I walked a couple of steps to the porch and put my hand on the doorknob and turned. Right before I pushed it open, two arms wrapped around me and pulled me back. I screamed as loud as I could, "Mom, help me! Please, Mom!" The feeling of being so close to being safe and then being physically pulled away from me filled me with every kind of dread there is. Even though it was after all those years, indescribable. The door was being torn away from me, and a flash of hope shot through my heart. But it wasn't my mom. It was a man. And he was enormous. I thrashed around and panicked at the shins of the person holding me while they were trying to get away from the person who had just come out of the house. I was scared, but I was furious. "Let me go! Where is she? Where's my mom? What'd you do to her?" As my throat stung from all the screaming and I was drawing in another breath, I became aware that a sound that had been present for longer than I perceived it. "Honey, calm down, please, I've got you." It sounded like my mom. The arm loosened and set me down, and as man approached me, blocked the porch light with his head, I noted his clothes. He was a cop. I turned to face the voice behind me and I saw it. It really was my mom. Everything was okay. I began to cry, and the three of us went back inside. I'm so glad you're home, sweetie. I was worried I'd never see you again. By that point, I was crying too. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I just wanted to come home. I'm sorry. It's okay, just don't ever do that again. I'm not sure me or my shins could handle it. A little laughter broke through the sobs and I smiled a bit. Well, I'm sorry for kicking you, but why do you grab me like that? I was afraid you'd just run away again. I was confused. What do you mean? We found your note on the pillow, she said, and pointed to the torn piece of paper that a police officer was sliding across the table. I picked up the note and it read. It was running away letter. It said that I was unhappy, never wanted to see her and any of my friends again. The police officer exchanged a few words with my mom on the porch while I was staring at the letter. I don't remember writing this letter. I didn't remember anything about this. But even if sometimes I went to the bathroom at night, I didn't remember. Or even if I could have gone to the woods on my own, even if all of that could have been true, the only thing that I knew was that the point was, this isn't how you spell my name. And I didn't write this letter. It wasn't me who wrote it. Also, a little PS. After a conversation with my mother about what happened when I was a kid, I was reminded of something that cannot be related to this. It answers some questions about this story, but raises other questions that I'm still looking into. Thank you all for listening, and do remember to stay safe out there. Goodbye.